for, since 1976 is when I met Evie, when I was, my very first job out of seminary was assistant pastor at Imperial Community Church. I met Evie and her husband, Jim Shipman. They are just a quality couple. And I have so much enjoyed getting to know them over the years. And I really praise God for them. Evie, you can correct me on this, Evie, but I know it's been over 30 years that you've taught ESL, English as a second language. But
that's
I think it's up near 40, right? Years. But is an expert in this area. And one of the two big objections that I get, the first one is, I don't know if I know enough of the Bible to do this. The other one is, for me to teach English seems a little intimidating because I don't think of myself as an English scholar. This comes up often, and Evie, I think, can give us some tools and help in dealing with this. So I'm going to turn it over now without anything else to Evie, and Evie, you can just kind of take it away, and I'm going to share the screen, and you can direct me how to use your outline, okay?
All right, that will work.
See if I can find it. Yeah, here it is, okay. And I can change it whenever you want me.
Great, all right. Thank you so much, Doc.
You're welcome.
Before we start, I hope this is not a disclaimer, but I want to say that since I don't know many of you personally, except for Doc, and I know of some of you. I'm not sure exactly what your experience is with this, how comfortable you are with things, whether some of you have probably been working with Doc on this project longer than I have. So I'm going to try today to put some things out there that will help you in all stages of your teaching experience. So if you're just barely getting started, hopefully that'll be an encouragement to you. If you've been teaching a while, hopefully I can give you some ideas that will help you also. So we'll just take it from there. And to get started, I'd like to give you a little idea of how I got started on this experience. I received a newsletter from Doc over a period of time, and included in those newsletters was what he was doing and the fact that he was working with students in China on their English, on spoken English, and I probably saw that several times, and then I saw it one time and I thought, well, maybe that's something I could do. And so somewhere out of the blue, I responded to a request and said, maybe that is something I could do, Doc, let me know. And I'll say right off the bat that response has kind of rearranged my early mornings over several days of the week since that time. But it's been a great experience. And so I told him I would try. And I think when I said I would try, I probably meant that I'll give it my best shot, Doc, but if it doesn't work, we can still be friends, right? I kind of left my options open because I wasn't convinced for sure, but we got started. And the first thing I did was listen as Doc worked with students. And I found the lesson time with students very interesting. And I listened in on Doc working with the students over a period of time, several different students, several different situations. I observed how he interacted with the students, how he arranged the time, how he used the Bible passages as a vehicle for instruction. And I have to say, I really enjoyed it. I even started thinking maybe I could do it, but right when I was thinking that, as I remember, Doc said it was my turn, and so I needed to become the instructor. Well, I would say I couldn't really argue with Doc's. He has a positive attitude and a vision for what this program can do, and has great faith in what the Lord could do if I would be willing to use my time and some experience. So it gave me at least enough confidence to get started, to try. It was different. then I have taught students English. I've taught adults, I've taught elementary students, but this was a different situation. So I have to say, I had to stop and think about it. And was I apprehensive? I think so. I think I definitely was. Maybe even a bit skeptical that I could really do this kind of thing, because I knew that there were people that prepared for years with a degree in just this thing that could, so that they could teach English. And I know there are very specialized programs designed to hone those kind of instructional skills. So I wasn't sure exactly how it would go, but I tried to assess how I could be part of this project, how I could use at least the skills that I did have. I said to myself, okay, I'm already a speaker of English, the language that these students want to work on. And so just that fact really gave me kind of a foot in the door. And I started thinking I could help people who are looking for ways to raise their skill level, to expand their vocabulary, and also I could provide a setting in which they would be comfortable to practice the English that they have. And so with that in mind, I kind of jumped off and started to do that. I started working with a couple of students. And so hopefully that'll encourage you if you have any of those feelings yourself. And I'd encourage you to don't be fearful about it, to pray about it, and then just move forward. And tonight in this session, I would hope to encourage you to know how much you do have to offer these students and to give you some ways of going about doing that. If you're a speaker of English, whether or not it's your first language, your primary language, it doesn't really matter. You can provide instruction which will help these students achieve their goals of being competent in English. So let's look at what we do hope to accomplish in this training session. I would say that the primary objective for this session is to provide you some specific methods that you can use to maximize the effectiveness of your English instruction time with your students. Let me repeat that so you'll know where we're going tonight. The primary objective for this session is to provide you some specific methods you can use to maximize the effectiveness of your English instruction time with those students. First, I'd like to go over just kind of a suggested format. From my initial time of listening in on Doc's teaching time, I learned how he arranged his time. And I still use those patterns or routines as a guideline for my lesson times. We start with the time of greeting, or including informal conversation about how things are going with my student. How's the job, school, family? How's the weather? What did you do during spring festival? Or something that gives us some time to actually find out about them, and also a little bit of time to assess where they are as far as being able to think in English and respond in English. And so I try to build a relationship where some good instruction and learning can take place, where their comfort level will be good. This time of conversation usually leads right into the how can I pray for you today or tonight? And then we do just that. We pray about anything that they mention to me that they're doing, or if they don't have any specifics, we try to just let the Lord know how thankful we both are for this opportunity, thankful for the hardware and the software that makes it available for us makes it possible for us to accomplish this. And then after we have a little time of prayer, we get into our lesson time, and we eventually finish up the session with prayer again. That format I've stuck with over a period of time, and it seems to work. It seems to work well. So we want to look at some specific ways that we can make this instruction time a good one. But before we do, I want to emphasize one thing, and that would be, it seems a good idea. It's been very helpful for me to keep good records for each student that I work with. And of course, this can be done in any way that's most comfortable for you. If you like to keep records right there on your computer, whatever works for you. I'm kind of old style, I guess, and I like to have something right there in my hand. So somehow I still have to have a folder or a paper or some things where I write down and make notes on what's happening. And so as my student is telling me about their job or about an interview they have coming up or that kind of thing, I keep notes on those. So the things we talk about during our opening conversations, I always date it and keep I also keep a prayer log to help me remember for next time to ask about things that we've talked about and prayed about. I have to mark on if I'm using materials where we continue through a set of materials, different chapters we're working on, I have to write where I started and where I finished for that day, because a week later, I might not tune right back into that. So I have to keep some pretty detailed notes of where I started, where I left off, and also anything else that I want to remember about what happened that day. I've even had a student, as we were reading, ask me some questions about the material, some content questions. Why did the Bible verse say this? And a couple of times I've had questions that I didn't think I could really answer adequately. I needed to get some scripture background myself. And so I write those down. And of course, then as I get off the computer, I'm looking through a Bible handbook, or I'm going to Bible Gateway or someplace or just getting out my Bible and looking for some backup so that I can answer those questions. So those are some of the things that it helps me, some of the reasons that it helps me, I guess you would say, to keep good records on what I'm doing. I try to make some notes about where I think we're going spiritually as I get to know the student over a few weeks, a few months, a year. It takes a while for me to kind of assess where we are. And then I often use those records or those reminders to help me with maybe a follow-up email during the week. So I can ask about whatever it was happening for them and some things that were important to them that they mentioned during our time. I think that keeping good anecdotal records over a period of time also provides some encouragement for me. I've looked back to the first few months when I worked with a student, and then I've looked at what kinds of things we're doing now, what we're talking about now, and I even keep some of the written assignments that I give them so that I can focus in on what the problems were they were having before and think about, well, did we really solve that problem? Do I need to work some more on that? So I would say keep good records on as a help to yourself, whatever way works for you. I think a caring, personal relationship as much as possible with the student or students you have, that personal relationship is a really strong platform on which to build a teaching relationship. It's a good, strong platform on which to build English skills. And it's also a strong platform to help a student begin a personal relationship with Christ and to encourage spiritual growth in students who have already had an encounter with Christ. So for me, keeping records has been something that's really been a help to me. Okay, let's focus in on some of the things that you might do during your actual instructional time or lesson time with your student. First, of course, you need to be sure you have if you're using the materials that Doc and the materials that Rhonda has prepared, also that go through the scriptures in an somewhat easy version of English. You want to be sure you have, I mean, this sounds simple, but be sure you have both agree on the sections and where you're going to start. Of course, you've made notes, so you know where you're going to start. But I found sometimes it takes the student a while to find where we left off last week, or if it's been 2 weeks for some reason. And I may be using it off my computer. I may be using a hard copy and make my notes on there. But I think most of the students probably are doing it right off the computer. So that takes them, my students sometimes, it takes us a few minutes to agree on where we are ready to start. So simple as that may be, it really helps to get you both on the same page exactly. And then to start, if there are vocabulary words that might be difficult or beyond the student's level of English, which is something you know since you've been talking to them in informal ways, you need to spend some time going over the meanings or common usages for those words. In some of the materials, there are there's vocabulary at the beginning of a scripture passage. You can use those. Or if you have hopefully gone over and looked at the passage yourself, even if it's 3 or 4 minutes before you start, to go back and review what you're going to read that day, that helps you be able to be ready for some of those words that might be sticklers for them, or that might be out of their comfort level. So you might start with some vocabulary. Something I like to do before a student reads the passage, maybe not every time, but I often like to give the student something to look for as they read. I might ask a question about the passage and ask if they could find this information when they read. I might say something like, today when you're reading, I'm going to ask you, what did Jesus say to the woman that came out to the well? What did he say to her? Did he talk to her? Although I try not to ask yes or no questions, but questions that'll give them the opportunity to look for something critically as they read. And I think it helps them focus in a little more. So one of the things you can do is give them something to look for as they read. And then if you're using materials where the Chinese translation is there, right afterwards, remember to ask your student if they would like to read it in the Chinese. I've had it both ways. Some like to, some will tell me, no, I'm comfortable. I think I've got it. And some will do it every time. So give them that opportunity if that material is available to you on the lesson that you're using. Then as your student reads through the passage or whatever you're working on, make notes on errors in pronunciation or word meanings if you can tell that they're just not getting it, or you might even highlight sentences that you would like your student to read again, because reread is also a tool that you can use. You probably won't want to interrupt while they're reading unless they are really, really stuck on something. Probably better to go over those things after the reading is finished so that they really get a feel for the passage as they're reading. After the student reads the passage, you'll want to go back to the beginning probably and walk through it with your notes, correct any errors that you heard in pronunciation or just any mechanical errors that would make it hard for them to understand or would change the meaning of what they've done. And then there's a great opportunity for you to use what I think is probably one of the best tools that we have, and that is to ask questions of them. questions, mechanical questions about the English, perhaps. I like to ask sometimes something like, oh, I noticed use the word astonished. What does that mean to you? Usually they'll give me a definition. And since they have so many electronic tools, everything is ready. I know that many times they go right to their online dictionary and give me the definition that's there. That's fine. And after they do, I usually ask them, do you know any other words that might mean astonished? Do you know any other words in English that would mean the same thing? I might ask them, what can you tell me about the woman that was talking to Jesus? Did she have a family? What could you tell me about her? Or things that would, I'm really probably not, I am interested in their impressions or what they are getting from the scripture passages, but I'm also, with those questions, trying to create opportunities for them to formulate some English response. I want them to have to think how to construct English sentences. It's something that we do just automatically in our mind very quickly. But for them, that's one of the things that we want to do is just create those situations or opportunities where they have to use the English that they do know. And then that gives us the opportunity to respond and make questions back. So questions. I sometimes try to ask questions that encourage them, depending on the level of my student, questions that would encourage them to think about sequence of events. I might ask them, what happened first in the verses that we read today? And then when they tell me, then of course I'll go on and what was the next thing? Or what do you think was the most interesting thing that happened during the time that Paul was in this city? Just something that gives them the opportunity and forces them really to use the English that they have. I might also ask them, do you have any questions you'd like to ask me about what we just read? So again, questions. Try to avoid those questions that they can answer with yes and no, because that doesn't really give you much opportunity to work on their English. Another thing that I think is helpful during the lesson time, if it's appropriate with your student, if you're at that point, is to try and build some knowledge on how to navigate the Bible. Something that we probably almost take for granted, but it depends on the person's experience with the Bible. The idea that the Bible is divided into books and that it has different sections, and that if you want to look for something in the Bible, you kind of need an address for it, or what does it mean today that we're reading in number 1 Thessalonians or whatever it is, so that without dropping a big lecture on them, I try to start to find out what they know about navigating through the Bible, being able to use the Bible. I think we can't take for granted that they even know that there are 2 sections, that there's an older part of the Bible, that the newer part of the Bible is when Jesus walked the earth, and then when Jesus was gone, his followers were the people that spread the message. Just some basic overall ideas that I think are helpful, that you can start to build during that lesson time. And for that to be appropriate, of course, you have to make some assessments of your student. Does it seem like there's a person that's comfortable with the Bible, that if you're talking about Luke or John or Matthew, that they know those are the names of books in the Bible, and that's how the Bible's kind of divided up. That's not something we can assume, I think, with someone that we're working with. So I try to assess where we are there and start to build some what I call navigational skills, so that when we get to that point, they'll know that what we looked at today is not everything about Paul, but it's some of the things that were written down about Paul. And there are other things that we'll find out later or in other books that if you have a Bible, we can find those things. So start to build some just physical skills of working through the Bible as a book. Another thing that you can do, I think, during the lesson time is to use use the text entry feature of your whatever program you're using, Skype or Zoom, or you can move to something where they actually can respond during the lesson time, give you a written response. I don't do that all the time, and you don't want to do anything that takes a long time because that does eat up the personal face-to-face or one-on-one time that you have. But anytime you can get them to write a response, that's helpful too. So use text also if that's comfortable for you to do that, and if the program that you're using allows you to do that, use the text entry for because I say it kind of creates a gold mine of opportunity really for you to go over what they've just written, to make corrections or suggestions, and then to have them reread to you, which again is another tool. Sometimes I've found they'll make the corrections as they listen to what they've written. Maybe as they read through it, they start to make corrections, which is great because it means their ear is being tuned a little more finely to what they're doing. So let's kind of walk back through those quickly. Remember, before you read, maybe give them something to look for as they read so that they read critically. As you read, make notes on any errors or anything that you need to go back and correct. Reread sections if that is something that seems helpful to you at that time. And then the big one, I think, is use questions so that you create opportunities where they have to answer you in English. And if appropriate, start to give them some knowledge of how the Bible's arranged and what they're going to find in there to build their interest and their skill, so that they'll be comfortable doing that. Use the text entry features on whatever program you're communicating with so that they will have the opportunity to respond to you in a written form. And then one I think we'll finish up with is use what I call role play or dialogue with them to kind of force them to formulate some English dialogue on their own. I've told them things like, I'll be Jesus and you be the woman that came out there, and I'm going to ask you some questions, and how would you answer me? Or if I asked you to tell me, if you were the woman there at the well and I asked you to tell me why you came out there today, what would you say? And simple things like, well, I came out to get some water, or this is the only way I can. It just forces them to use the Bible passages that you've given them, that you've looked at. It forces them to be able to do some English construction using the information that they have. Okay, I think we've covered a little bit of what you might be able to do during the lesson time. Let's look at what you might be able to do after the lesson time. I think one of the most valuable tools you have is what the student creates on his own. It gives you the material you need to work on specific grammar issues that the student will have. And these problem areas need to be addressed if the student's going to make progress in English production. Let me go over that one more time. One of the most valuable tools you have is what the student creates on his own. It gives you the material you need to work on specific grammar issues that the student will have. And these problem areas need to be addressed if the student is going to make progress in English production. So that's why I'm going to say give some homework. Don't panic. You don't have to be trained in linguistics or anything to see areas where your student needs help. Remember, you've already gone over the lesson. You've maybe done some role play. You've asked them to expand on vocabulary. So you have some idea now on where they need some help. Some of the most common grammatical errors are pretty easy to spot. You don't have to have a lot of special training. If you're an English speaker, they'll step out to you. Those things might include incorrect verb tenses, maybe poor selection of vocabulary, shall we say, or improper use of pronouns. That's a common one. Improper use of how to compare things, comparisons. Forming verb tenses with irregular verbs. Sometimes that can be a problem area. And homework doesn't really have to be a long assignment. It could include maybe a summary of what was read in the lesson. It could be a list of words from the lesson that you've gone over. You could ask them to write sentences on the words. You could ask them to answer a question about the passages that you read. So I think at this point, Doc, I'm going to have you put up I gave you a little sample, a homework sample that was one that I actually got back from a student. And I think we'll take a few minutes and just actually go over this little sample of homework. Hope that it would be helpful for you, and I'll probably do a little role play myself. I'll try to be both people, and we'll see how that works. I asked this student, the first thing I asked this student to do is I gave them a list of words, and I asked the student to write a sentence using each word. So when we started our lesson time that day, I had my copy, student had what they had sent to me. So I always ask the student, okay, let's start with that first word. Would you go ahead and read it to me? Student tells me, plague, a disease or problem. I've got a huge plague. Well, that might not be exactly how I would use the word plague, but I think it's pretty close. And so probably on that one, we'd just go with it. Obviously, that's kind of fine-tuning some meaning. And so we'd probably just go with that one. I'd move to the next one, changed his mind. Student reads to me, he changed his mind because he do not think he should smoke anymore. Okay, good. Let's look back at that sentence and let's look at the first verb that you used. Student looks at it and tells me changed. Good. Is that in the present or is that in the past? That's in the past because that's why I put the ED on there. Okay, good. He changed his mind because he do not think he should smoke anymore. Let's look at do. Is that in the past or is that in the present? Teacher, I think it's in the present. Well, let's see if we could make those agree. I think it will sound a little better if you can make those agree. And so then the student would probably go back and change it. And what would be the word that you would use instead of do? No, can't put ED on that one. Oh, that's right. Okay, I'm going to put did on that one. Great, okay. All right, would you read it back to me now the way you have it? He changed his mind because he did not think he should smoke anymore. Oh, I think that sounds much better. Let's go to the next word, echoing. Would you read me what you have read me your sentence. When you shut inside a huge hole or cave, it will have echoes. Okay, let's go back. Is that how you want it? Let's go back and look at that first verb. You have shut, but I think what you meant there was shout. Oh yes, I was thinking about talking. Yes, talking loud, shout. Let's make that shout. All right. When you shout inside a huge colon cave, it will have echoes. That's one way you could say it. But actually, you can use the word echo as a verb itself. So I think a little more comfortable way to say that would just be to say it will echo. So why don't you put that one and read it back to me, and let's see how that sounds to you. Student writes it in and of course reads it back to me, and we will go on to the next one. The next word I sent the student was fled. And the sentence I have is, when he seized the gun, he fled from the government. All right, let's take a look at the first verb that you used. Seize. Okay, is that in the past or is that in the present? Well, that's in the present. Why does it have an S on it? Well, because if it's he, I have to use the S on it. You are right. Let's look at the next verb that you use. When he seized the gun, he fled from the government. Is that in the present or is that in the past? Well, that's in the past. Well, how could we make those agree so that your sentence sounds a little better in English? Let's go back. Let's try that first verb. What would you do with seize? How could you make that in the past? Can you add ed? I don't think so. No, because that's one of those verbs where everything changes when you put it in the past. Do you know the past for see? Yes, teacher, I think it's saw. All right, let's change it and then see how that sounds with fled. Okay, would you read it back to me? When he saw the gun, he fled from the government. Okay, I think that's that's a little better choice. That sounds very good. That sounds very good. Let's try our last word. Caught his eye. Okay, there are lots of unicorns and it caught his eye. Wow, I think that's a good sentence. Caught. Is that present or is that past? I think it's past. You are right. It is. It's one of those verbs that just changes the whole verb there. You can't, no ed necessary on that one. Do you know any other words that are kind of like that, where you change the whole word? I think you told me one in the other sentence. You went from see to saw. And of course, then depending on the student's skill level, I might elicit some other verbs from them. And if not, I could make some suggestions. What about the word buy? If I go to the store, I buy something. If I did it yesterday, how could I say that? Just to encourage some development of how to use those words in English. Okay, let's move to the paragraph. I asked the student to write a paragraph telling me, you can see what it says there, write a paragraph telling what you remember about Joseph and his family. And I had to get kind of specific because on this student, if I say, would you write a paragraph, I usually will get maybe 2 sentences and very short. So I tried to foresee that and ask for some specifics. So I said, tell me about the brothers, tell me about his trip to Egypt, and tried to encourage the student to expand on her ideas. And this is exactly what I got. We'll read through it, and don't worry, we won't go through every error, but we will read through it, and just as the student did to me, and then we'll go back and see how to correct a few of the things that are here. Joseph got a colorful cloth from his dad, and he told his brothers his dream. His brothers don't like him, and they hated him more after that. So they first got Joseph's cloth from Joseph. Then they sell him as a slave. After all of these, his brothers ripped his cloth and showed it to their father and told him Joseph was dead. But after a few years, the king of Egypt thinks that Joseph is a good slave. So he let him be the one who should give people food to eat. When people have no food to eat, they need to go find Joseph to get food. And Joseph's family was also count as a no food family. When Joseph's brothers saw him, they didn't recognize him, but Joseph recognized them. So he told them the truth, and it makes them super surprised. They thought Joseph was a slave, or maybe he's dead already, but he's not. And they feel very sorry for Joseph now. But Joseph already forgave them, and his family finally can live together. Well, I think you can see that there is a gold mine of opportunity in here. First, of course, I was very encouraged that the student remembered details. It had been a week or two since we had read this account, and I thought the student got the point. But lots of opportunities to expand on vocabulary. I'm not sure exactly where they got the word cloth for coat, but from the dictionary probably. And so that would be something that we would work on in the first sentence. We need to correct the word told. His brothers don't like him. Of course, that's in the present. And then she works into the past. They hated him more after that. So they first got Joseph's cloth from Joseph, then they sell him. So we're back to the present, back and forth from the present to the past. Lots of opportunities there to let the student do. I try to point out and give them the opportunity to change it so that it is consistent. In the middle there, but after a few years, the king of Egypt thinks that Joseph is a good slave. We're back to the present. So they led him. I think that was supposed to be let him be the one who should give people food to eat. And anyway, we went back and I would go back with the student, work through this, work on any errors and try to encourage the student to see that for themselves and then make those changes. And that takes some time in something of this length. It would take some time. I don't usually mark it up and send it back to them. I try to go through it with them and ask them, does this sound good to you? Wait a minute, we've got this in the present, we've got this in the past. Is ripped the best word to use for what happened to his coat? Just different things that would help them also expand their vocabulary. And then when all the corrections are made, then I would ask the student to go back and read it again to me. And frankly, something of this length, it would probably take a good part of our lesson time. We really might not read a new passage that day, but this really gives me the opportunity to go back over things that the student, I can see where the student is, what some of the biggest problem areas are, and it really gives me the opportunity to work on that. So I would say, I'd encourage you to give them, I'll call it homework, but give them some follow-up, if you want to put it that way. Give them the opportunity to respond to you, and they have all week or whatever your time frame is to do that. And if I don't see it maybe the day before lesson time again, that's a good chance for me to send a little email that lets them know, did you have time to do the assignment that I asked you to do, and try to get it to me so I can take a look at it. So I think you can see how giving some follow-up assignment like that in a written way can give you opportunities to do it. So let's kind of recap on the after work. Summaries are a good idea, questions, and maybe some vocabulary or sentences. Let's kind of wrap up our session with just some, I'll say some tips or some ideas that I think, some guiding principles that will really maximize your effectiveness in all areas, when in the homework, in the lesson time, in everything you do with your students. Just some overriding principles, I think, that will make all of your relationship with your student work to your advantage as you try to work through their English. And the first one is, number one is that you really need to, let's call it assessment. You need to continuously assess where you are with that student. And I don't mean you have to give formal quizzes or anything like that, but as you look back through your records, you'll see things that conversational skills that you can work on. It's ongoing, but it helps you plan where you are. If you go through the vocabulary and there really isn't much that the student needs to do, then you may decide, this student has a pretty rich vocabulary. I think I'm going to focus my attention on how to put these things together to make a coherent package in English. So the first thing you do is you're kind of constantly assessing where you are with the student, or where they are on their English level. And then also I encourage you, second, to know your lesson material well. Since our English instruction is driven really by Bible-based lessons, you want to be comfortable with the lesson and with the specific passages that are used. You want to be able to maybe anticipate questions if you have a student that's at that level, so that you can be ready to answer some of those. So know your materials well. Third, I think, is probably something that you're already doing, but it bears repeating. It bears really focusing on, and that's speak deliberately as you work with your student. That usually means slowing your pace a little. Consider the pace that you're using. Use pauses as you speak. This will help your student understand what you're saying, and also just kind of builds in a little think time as they try to respond also. Be careful with the pronunciation of words. Be clear with word endings. There's a big difference between can and can't. I don't have to emphasize that when I'm talking to you, but if it's your second or third language, then it does make a difference. And so be careful with things like that, so that it makes it best for them to understand. It can change, sometimes just those things can change the entire meaning of a sentence to them. So speak deliberately, use a good pace. A fourth thing you can do is just choose your words carefully. Use, in the beginning, depending on your student, of course, use more common English words. Don't use, of course, want to use local idioms or play on words, things that are maybe that are built, that are a humor or something like that, that it takes some sophistication with that second language to be able to appreciate or understand. So choose your words carefully. And of course, I know you're already doing this, be positive and encouraging. It almost goes without saying, but we do need to say it. For students that are trying to use a language that they're just learning and perhaps they don't have the opportunity to use too often, can be kind of daunting, I think. So put yourself in their shoes. Maybe you have learned other languages besides your first language. If so, it is difficult, especially for adults. It's just a little more, we're a little more fearful about that. So encouragement is a great tool. And then also, I think the last thing is be resourceful. Don't be afraid to look around for other sources, ways that you can kind of support what you're doing. If you're stuck on a particular skill, get on the computer, Google it. And yes, I do think Google is a verb, isn't it? Anyway, you can Google it, and it is now. And I have students tell me, and grandkids that tell me that all the time, just Google it. So get some information, and there's a lot out there that will help you. And just to absolutely finish up, we'll do just that. We won't Google it, but let's look. I think, Doc, if you want to switch to a site, I tried to give you some, there are many, many sites that encourage learning of the English language. But I put a few on here that I think could be helpful, and we'll just go down those very quickly. The first one, talkenglish.com. As you can see, it includes some instructional options, quizzes, and 30 lessons on basic English. And let me say, as we look at these, that depending on your student, you can refer them to these sites. You can give them these links and tell them to do a section on irregular verbs or possessives or pronouns or something. But also, I think another thing, when I look at these sites, they just help me sometimes isolate maybe how to work on a skill with my student. Or sometimes because most of us, I will assume, have been speaking English for a long time. And I know my schooling in English, the words that we use to describe certain things in English are different than they use now. And so sometimes it looks different. And I might know what I want my student to do, but I can't think of a way to get it. So even though I may not send my student to one of these sites, just looking at it sometimes helps me know some ways that I could approach it with that student. Let's look at the second one, ego4u.com. I put on this one a good starting point. If you choose to go to this one, is select the daily English lesson. It does have some role plays and some exercises for very specific skill issues in English. And it is leveled. In other words, you can select, I don't remember on this one what they call it, but probably beginning or more advanced. And so it gives you a little more range with your students. You can kind of look down those. I won't take any more of your time just to look specifically, except let's look at number 5, the englishtest.net. I included this one on here because it's possible that, I don't know all of your students, of course, it's possible that you may have students that are focused on practicing their English with you because they actually have a goal of either of receiving instruction using the English language, of going to a university or a job interview or something where they have to pass a certain test, and a very common one is the TOEFL. And right there on the bottom is a little explanation of that if it comes up. If it doesn't, don't worry about it. It's not something that you really have to know all about. But if you have a student that you know is going to be taking the TOEFL, we'll just kind of read through that to just give you some background information if you need it. TOEFL really just means, it's an acronym that stands for Test of English as a Foreign Language. And it's a test that measures proficiency in English in more of an academic context. Most universities and colleges in the US and Canada require you to take the TOEFL if you want to apply for a place to study there. And in most countries, the TOEFL is a computer-based test. This means you have to follow instructions on a screen and answer questions interactively. The TOEFL test consists of the following disciplines: reading, listening, and writing. And I might add, those are all things that we're trying to do with our students. So if you want to score high, if your student wants to score high marks in all 3 sections, it really takes a very extensive vocabulary. So if that comes up with a student, if they are aiming for passing the TOEFL, that just gives you some ideas. And this particular site, englishtest.net, has a section that's pretty much geared. It has 100 TOEFL listening exercises, and it gives specific links. And there's one there that I put on there in case you do want to follow it. But you could go to this site, englishtest.net, if that's something appropriate. If you have beginning students, it may not be an issue at all, but just to add to your knowledge base so that you know where to go if that comes up. I hope we've covered everything that we said we were going to cover. And we have just a few minutes. If there are specific questions that you'd like to turn on your mic and ask, you could do that, or you could do it by email if there's something that you think I could really help you with, something very specific, or if you have some comments or ideas you want to express tonight, go for it. and then I'll kind of just.
Now, Evie, one of the questions that that I would like to hear your answer on is how do your students respond to correction? Do they respond positively? Do they respond negatively? Do they discourage? How do they encourage you to correct them? How do they respond to you correcting their grammar, their pronunciation?
That's a good question. And from the time that I first start working with a student, I try to be very positive and encouraging. When I first started working with the student, I think that was almost a surprise to them. So that when they finish reading, I always tell them, wow, that's great. I could really understand you in English. Now, let's go back. There were a few words, I think, that I'd like you to look at again. And I try to be, I would try to, you have to be perceptive about that. If you have a very shy old student, you're probably going to have to tread carefully there. But I've also had a student who I knew was in the field of journalism, media type, and this student wanted to actually, do work on television in English. And so she was almost aggressive about wanting to, and I don't work with her right now, but she was almost aggressive in wanting to know, tell me, teacher, how to do it right. So it probably depends on your student, and you just kind of have to feel that out. If they're, of course you don't want to, but I always, just a personal habit, try to precede any corrections with something that will open up them to accept correction from me. So they'll know that I'm correcting what they're doing, and I'm not, it's nothing negative with them, but something about that production. Any other questions we could cover? All right.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Evie.
All right. We'll just pray, and just like we do with our students, and we'll be finished for tonight.
Okay.
And if there are any ways you want to follow up, you probably have my email in the group email. If not, get with Doc,
I'll send it to
and
you.
we'll go from there.
I'll send everybody your email.
All right. Let's pray, and then we'll finish up. Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for these who've taken their time, Lord, to try to make it possible to do the best job that they can in the pursuit of what we're doing here with Doc. I thank you. I thank you for those who've already worked with us on the materials and on the idea of how to go about evangelism. I thank you for this training. I thank you for Doc and the vision that he has and that he's included us in this opportunity. And so I pray, Father, that you would just help us to think clearly on these things, to be open to your leading, and just to use the ideas that you have given to us. Thank you for blessing us with time to do this, with the hardware to do it, to be able to sit right in our own home and work with people so far away. Father, I thank you for that opportunity, and we don't want to miss it. And I would just ask you to bless each of these who's with us tonight, Father. I pray these things in the precious name of Jesus. Amen.
Well, thank all of you for being here, and I'll send you the connection, but this will be on Facebook. And actually, all the training will be on Facebook, and I'll send you the information of how if you missed any of the sessions and you want to get them, how you can download them and listen to them. But thank you guys so much for being with us, and especially Evie, thank you so much for leading us through this. Very, very helpful.
Good.
Thank
All right.
you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, Evie. Good night. Thank you.